Morning, Em. How's it
Hi,
going?
Craig. It's good. It's good. Look, we had a little bit of an argy-bargy on Friday about media
Did
and
we?
AI, and I'm pretty excited to get into it a bit more.
Well, actually, yeah, it was about a news site, and
Well,
actually, I,
it's
I wrote
considered
a
very
link.
like one of the stalwarts of high and good, well-reputed media in Australia as well. We might add it's not like The Onion or something like that, but we're not going to say who it was.
I won't let you diss the onion, but look, I was reflecting, and I wrote a LinkedIn post over the weekend that my Saturday mornings used to be grab the Financial Review and read it back to back, and then increasingly I've noticed that I start there, but at the end I'm asking all the questions that the journalists haven't
Yeah,
answered for me. I'm in Claude or Perplexity or one of these AI tools trying to find the
yeah,
answers myself. And I was reflecting on whether I should trust the information coming out of the AIs more than the journalistic organisations. And yeah, and I suppose that is timely. I didn't think it was an altercation. I
right?
think it was a robust
Argy-bargy,
conversation.
and I'm okay with that. I'm up for it.
It was a text
Text
message
really
rant.
caught me off guard though, because I sent you a podcast covering something. I was like, oh, this is, they're talking about AI. And your reaction was so strong. And when I found out later that the drone delivering your food had failed, I understood you're probably hangry. But like it was such a strong reaction. And I take the position where I read everything, whether I agree with it or not. And I'm very conscious that everyone has an agenda, and that agenda will, to some extent, be made manifest in the views that they express. And then also, you might have someone who's potentially a bit more of a right wing journalist, but they got a job at a left wing joint. And so they have to write in the voice that also aligns with the organization that employs them. So that's, agendas within agendas. And so I do agree that sometimes some of our media in Australia is letting their political views show a little bit too much, to the point where I feel like objectivity is lost. And I do also struggle sometimes with the
Okay.
snark in some of our mainstream media. But I also wonder if that's just representative of the times, where the impunity that we express ourselves with online is starting to seep into how we interact with each other in real life.
Well, I think there's um, definitely the world's polarized. That's nothing new. But I also think there's this yearning for people to understand and learn and understand more. And if I look at a core Craig principle, a
Really?
CCP, can I say a CCP?
Like a little list.
CCP?
Check.
It is that I want to live in a world where people are able to make up their own minds. And so I'm not telling people how to think and all that. And a good example was, so an issue I think is a really hotbed topic. I'm really interested because I've got a 17-year-old today, twin boys, and is around housing in Australia,
Rachel's
and what are
obsessed with
the
that too, and she's 7.
well, so I was looking at how much of the media are actually talking about housing as an issue, and I went onto the ABC site. They had something on their front page, and it was reflecting on uh, uh, the city of Vienna and how it has a very high long-term rental market, completely different to how it was here. And it was a glowing report, and I was thinking that there's probably historical reasons why they have that, and it turns out it was one of those rebuild after World War One situations, and they decided that housing wasn't an investment as much as a sort of a right for a, a civil society, and so they came up with a completely different system to what we have. But I thought the article was overwhelmingly positive, so my natural thing was to try and compare it, do some research with what about other markets, what are the downsides of the that system, uh, and and it was a very sort of left wing slanted article, and so I was like, well, how do I find out the full breadth of
Yeah, 'cause I
information?
was
How do I make
thinking that,
myself uncomfortable
the
with this?
media has a story to write, but there's no one from Vienna here to weigh in and say if it's actually as idealistic as put forward. I often think about that when I see these rankings of the world's most livable cities, and actually two of them, Japan and Norway, while they have some of the highest living standards, they also have some of the highest suicide rates. So, that doesn't suit the story. And so when you're reporting on the highest standards of living, that's what you're writing about. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of interrogation about the correlation of those or the causation of those two statistics.
Yeah, so I find the media sometimes it's the sin of omission, the things they don't tell you, and then also the stories they don't focus on. And so that was the only article I could find in the last week on housing. I would say as a country, that's probably one of
Really?
our
I feel
top.
like it's in the paper constantly.
Well, maybe I didn't
Or
look
it's
hard
like
enough,
every
but I
page
just
is people griping about our housing shortage and building. And when it comes to AI, though, and getting our news from AI, who's curating? You know, if a newspaper, you know that some are left and some are right, and some are a bit more moderate, but a little bit left, you know, and we know that when we pick up a paper, what we're signing up for, generally, if you read that paper regularly, they're not quiet about that. But when you're reading your news that's been curated by AI, where's the disclosure of the agenda that's steering what you're reading or what you're consuming?
well, yeah, that there isn't. So I guess you can different models. So the Perplexity tool that I use allows you to choose different models, for example, in the back end. So you can choose Elon's model, or you can choose Anthropic's model, or you choose a bunch of different things. So that way you can kind of get information from a
They
range
all
of
still
different.
sound a bit tech bro skewed, though.
Yeah, and they're all Silicon Valley focused, which has a particular, that area of the world has a particular take on things. I think it's asking good questions and also trying to ask as a sort of, not necessarily as a journalist in the first thing, but as a researcher in the first
Yeah.
thing. So really focusing on facts and you can ask it to exclude sort of media information as a primary source, which I think is an interesting thing, and just focus on official statistics and official things like that.
What I think is really, really important, and I'm quite concerned about, is that we do need journalists. You know, not the listicle types that write, you know, 5 ways to please your partner, but I mean like the guys that do the investigative journalism, because AI can only report what has been fed into it. And the role of an investigative journalist is to go and find information that people don't necessarily want us to know about, but it's important for the good of the public, or it's important for our community to know that this is happening. And I'm very concerned that, you know, at all the chatter of journalism dying out, because who's going to hold us accountable if not the journalists? Because the politicians aren't and the police aren't, and AI can't. So, you know, that I
Yeah,
actually think that the role of these investigative journalists is incredibly important in our society.
I think that they are. I think it's the business model of traditional media has been challenged. And then there's the emergence of new media, which I don't think has really taken hold in Australia as much as elsewhere. So when I'm thinking about global news, often I don't read an Australian piece at all, unless it happens to be a writer I like. I'll go off to, I've got my favorite readers on Substack, and I'll go and read their standalone things, or I will search out particular journalists that I trust. And so I won't go for the masthead. I won't go for the Age, the Guardian,
From
the
the other way
Australian,
around,
any of the.
I find brands that I trust. And while I don't think any system is infallible, I will read, usually in any given week, I'll definitely read multiple copies of the Australian, the Age, the Guardian, the AFR, to get a kind of a broader, and then I listen to all of their podcasts as well. And that's the thing I can do while I'm gardening or looking after children, or, you know, walking around doing things that mums that work do. So I do really
Yeah,
like that these kind of bastions of journalism have adopted podcasting. I think that that's a very good thing for me, because I can
yeah,
get a deep dive into stories that I'm curious about, um, and it's still with reputable sources.
yeah, and I guess
I synthesize podcasts from those platforms as well, like when it's summarizing. Yeah.
no, I guess it could if it picks up a transcript in its search, and so I think you. I one of the articles I read through, and there were some logical inconsistencies in there, and that must have been where it had pulled a data point from one source, and another data point from another thing, and compared them, and they weren't actually. It was like one data point was slightly measured differently, and it didn't make sense what had come through. So there's things where you go that it didn't make sense, but I learned a lot more. Especially the thing that I was interested in was there was a period in our energy system. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, where it was called the gold plating era in Australia, and one of the reasons that our energy costs are quite high, and it was about 10 to 20 years ago, that there was over investment in poles and wires, and I was just curious about how much that was impacting the cost of
Do we have
energy
to then
locally,
maintain
because
those systems?
well, once you've paid for them and invested in them, and these big corporations that own them have paid and invested in these assets, we keep paying for them in our bills. That's when you see that. And so I was curious about that, and that provided a lot of information, which was very helpful, and actually pointed out that this has been a big challenge for manufacturing and industrial companies in Australia. And so I learned a lot from it. I was always frustrated. Like, I used to watch the Insiders on ABC on a Sunday morning, and I'd just be yelling at the screen, like, ask the obvious question, ask this question, ask this question. And they'd always be asking, focused on the inside game of politics rather than solving the challenges. And so, yeah, it scratches that edge for me. And I think it does raise a question, like trust in traditional media is really low, and historically, but then you've also got these new tools where there isn't a track record of trusting what they necessarily put out, what things they omit to say. The fact that nearly all the data that these AIs are trained on is from the last 20 years. And so you don't get historical information. Once you get back towards the pre-internet age, the data becomes quite sparse. And so you're not picking up perhaps useful information from a historical context. It's very slanted by sort of the trends and fads of our time. And so, me, I'm just an avid seeker of interesting ideas.
With a tech pro bias. Listen, we've got to do a time check here.
Yes.
This is why I'm advocating for us going back to our long form podcast, because writing as this is.
Yes.
I think if we cut out all your ums and ahs and made you speak faster, we'd stay in time, but we have not as yet managed to complete a thought and finish within the 10 minutes. So the takeaway that journalism is important, and at the end of the day, garbage in, garbage out, right? So AI still needs high quality content to be fed into it.
Yeah, and I think also the takeaway is that the traditional power of mainstream media is kind of challenged in a way that might not be immediately apparent. If you have thousands of people starting to seek their own understanding of the world through their own questions to different models, it potentially, you're not, if you're a political organisation or a government trying to get a message out, or if you're an advertiser trying to sell something, or get out a public health message or something, it's going to be, you're going to be up against all these diffuse prompt responses that people are generating on their own.
All right. I think
did I answer too much?
Might be an isolated incident rather than the norm, but let's interrogate that further in another conversation.
One thing I will share that it's not related to our topic today, but a new book I started reading. It's called Vibe Coding by Gene Kim.
Coding, VIBER?
No, Vibe.
Right,
Just
VIBE coding.
Yeah, by Gene Kim and Steve Yeager, and it's talking about how the computer development, computer programming is just going through this massive inflection. And to me, it reminds me of when the internet first arrived, and all the tech people were doing internet stuff, and the rest of the world hadn't quite caught on. And potentially every knowledge value chain is going to be a fast follower of the tech bros like me who are vibe coding on their weekends, and it's kind of thrilling.
There's always going to be early adopters, right? And the great joy I get from being an artist is I often get to hang out with the people that are walking that line between genius and insanity. I've been accused of being both myself at times. I think I'm just someone.
I think you're accusing me there, were you? Or maybe
I'm going to let you
insanity
think
there.
about that. Nice to see you. I'll catch up with.
Yeah, likewise.
Bye.
See ya. See ya. Bye.